One classic nightmare of anybody who's done a performing art goes a little something like this. So you're backstage, let's say you're about to go on for your scene in a theater show. All right. And you're doing your warm-ups, you're making a fool of yourself. Around to the rough and rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran. Until you realize, I don't remember my first line. Wait, which character am I playing? Is this Shakespeare? Is this Gilbert and Sullivan? Where am I? And then with 3 minutes left to go, somebody hands you a script, and you go, okay, good. All right, maybe it's a big block of text, but I could get it. Oh, wait, okay, I can do this. 45 seconds left to go, you realize, I'm in my pajamas. Now, folks, there's only one thing left to be done at this point, and that is improvise. Now, if you just found yourself in the situation that I just described, I'm sorry, I really can't help you, that's pretty rough. But improvisation, or the act of doing something that you have not planned using whatever you find, is more than what you might see on Whose Line Is It Anyway, or something like what you might hear in jazz. I think it's actually a worldview that you can apply to any domain of your life, and it's something that you can use to be more effective in your various roles, and even be a better servant to God's kingdom. All right, so I think that improvisation improves your thinking in three major ways. First of all, it makes you more positive, which allows you to be more creative, which translates to a greater readiness for what's to come in life. So when I say positivity, do I mean like this emoji boy up here, like everything is awesome, right? You've seen the Lego movie? Okay. Not necessarily. More a confidence and an openness. So a confidence meaning that you know that the solution that you need exists, and you know that you're the one with the wherewithal to find it. My own story with improvisation actually begins when I played drums in Gordon College Jazz Ensemble. Now, I didn't always know how I was going to get from the top left of this page to the bottom right of that page, but it always seemed to work out. This seemed to flow. Even the drum fill in bar 67, that was in a really kind of scary place, like drum solo, it always worked out in the end. It's a confidence. It's also an openness to those around you. So any sweaty tooth people here? It's our improv comedy group on campus. What's the first rule of improv comedy? Anybody knows? Yes and? Yes and? That's right. So yes and, let's say Greg at your business meeting says, oh yeah, I've got this great idea for like a video dating site. And you're like, yes and? We're never going to do that, Greg. Greg, I brought the donuts so I wouldn't have to listen to your ideas, man. Come on. Well, maybe there's something salvageable in that idea. Maybe you should say, well, yes, and tell me more about how this might look. YouTube actually started off that way. There are perfectly salvageable things in some terrible ideas. Now, one epic salvaging of a terrible situation that happened recently was Nathan Chen at the last Olympics fell several times in his final round, basically ruling him out for a podium spot altogether. But he then went on, he just thought, well, might as well, went on to complete 6 quad jumps. I can't do it, but spin around 4 times. It's amazing. Never done before in competitive figure skating. Took a terrible situation and made it into something awesome, something that rose the bar. And he won the world championship next year, so it's like, whatever, he was fine. So, once you're more confident and more open to what may come, you're ready to be more creative. Now, what do we mean when we say creativity? This is sort of an abstract mental space, right? It's tough to define. But for example, in jazz music, I would say, I guarantee you are never going to hear the same thing twice. Let me rephrase that. You might not hear the same idea in the same context all the time. So, for example, what we just heard there, right, something like that, a lot of the time you heard it in a minor key there, so it was maybe something kind of melancholy-ish. Like that, right? But it can also be a very, very happy sort of melody. Or you could do something a little more wacky with it, maybe something like a... Now it sounds almost like one of those get ready to have your mind blown at the IMAX kind of things, right? Same idea, different context, totally different results. And our very own Dr. Bird, who everybody here adores, once said, "True improvisation has nothing really to do with making stuff up on the spot. Rather, it is the creative and inspired weaving together of previously rehearsed material." One of my favorite examples of this concept comes from my own field of study here at Gordon College, physics. But first, Mozart. So, one thing that people forget about a lot of the great classical musicians is that they were amazing improvisers. This guy wrote the overture to Don Giovanni the day before the opera premiered. Anybody relate, like, I haven't started my research paper yet, and it's like due in 3 hours? There are even stories of, for example, he was at a party and somebody put sheet music in front of him with intentional errors intending to embarrass him, and he corrected the errors as he went along because he was dope. He was amazing. He inspired one of the greatest physicists of all time, you probably all recognize, Albert Einstein. Einstein said that Mozart's music was so perfect it's almost as if it had always existed. It was waiting in the universe to be discovered by the master. And Einstein himself would go to the piano and play while he was working on his physics theories to help inspire him to see the universe in new ways. He in turn inspired one of my favorite jazz musicians and one of the gentlemen you saw playing the lick earlier, John Coltrane. But first of all, if we focus on the smarty pants in the middle for a second, and thanks to Facebook, the author of every dumb quote you have ever read. So he had just come off... Yeah, it's great, right? He had just come off of publishing a groundbreaking paper in 1905 on special relativity. This relied on the idea that light is a wave. And the people have known this since 1865. We know that light is a wave. It has an energy which is associated with its wavelength. So, right, ultraviolet light, short wavelength, lots of energy, can give you skin cancer if you're exposed to too much of it. Red light, longer wavelength, lower energy, the exit sign, not going to hurt you at all. So this was all fine and good, until the same year he had to explain some data that somebody had collected years earlier for something called the photoelectric effect. The basic idea is you shine light on a piece of metal and electrons fly off. So you're basically pummeling the metal with all this light, and then some electrons get scattered off as a result. Simple enough experiment. The only catch was that it didn't matter how intense the light was. So let's say you shone extremely intense, really, really, really bright red light on it. No electrons would fly off. If you shone even a little bit of ultraviolet light on it, then electrons would start to fly off. It's like, what's going on here? So Einstein thought pretty originally about this. He said it almost looks like it's a stream of particles. So shining super intense red light on the metal is like throwing 40 baseballs at a window, but they're all moving at 1 mile an hour. Probably nothing's really going to happen. On the other hand, if you shine even just a little ultraviolet light, maybe 2 baseballs going at 40 miles an hour, now the window's going to break. Same ideas, new context, world-changing results. Modern technology wouldn't be the same without this explanation of this phenomenon. It actually is the only Nobel Prize that Einstein won during his lifetime. So in turn, John Coltrane was inspired by Einstein's theory of general relativity, which explains gravity in terms of geometry. So why do we move towards Earth? Why do we fall towards the Earth? Because Earth curves space around it in such a way that we go that way. John Coltrane took what he could understand of this geometry and applied it to musical cycles. So he would say, write all the notes in the chromatic scale in a certain figure, and he would draw shapes on the inside of that figure to try and guide where his chord progressions might lead next. And that led him to some pretty interesting places, like it's just a very new way of thinking about harmony. If you listen to Giant Steps, the album that's off of, you'll know exactly what I mean. Stuff that nobody had ever heard before. So, how does this actually prepare you for life? I kind of promised an application here, right? Well, this is where the idea of Feynman path integrals come in as a metaphor for life. How pretentious does that sound? Please, just hear me out for a sec. So if you consider the motion of a particle, let's say a cough drop, which is what I have in my pocket, so improvise. If I throw this up in the air, how many people think it's going to take the path on the left? Anybody? Audience participation? Who thinks it's going to take the path on the right? Couple rebels? People are good. Exactly. But why? Why didn't it take the path on the right? For that matter, why didn't it hop out of my hand, run out the door, circle the observable universe 5 times, and then come and fall on the floor? Well, it just turns out it's too costly in terms of energy, right? It's just the simplest motion for the cough drop to just simply arc and then fall down. But using a technique, a mathematical technique called a path integral, you can actually calculate what every possible path of motion of the cough drop would look like, and then figure out the most efficient path, the one that it's actually going to take. And I think this is, well, first of all, there's a great cosmologist and jazz saxophonist called Stefan Harris. He wrote a book called The Jazz of Physics, which is basically my jam, as you might guess. But he says that a saxophone solo, or any solo, is a lot like this. So you have a certain set of chord changes, and you can take a lot of different paths over those chord changes. You just have to find one that works, that's going to be effective. And you don't know exactly what the path is going to look like right when you start out, but you just start, and it's going to be okay. You're going to figure it out. I think that this is actually a lot like life, and a lot like the way God calls us to do different things. So when God called Abram out of Ur, he said, "Go to a land that I will show you." When he called Moses to go in front of Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go," and Moses, well, he's like, "Yeah, but I'm not good at the talking to people thing." God said, "I gave you the capability to speak. I'll give you the words to say. Just go on up and do it." Now, Jonah took the path that ran away from God, as a lot of us from Sunday school might remember, because he wasn't ready to, you might say, improvise, to consider a different worldview, that the Ninevites might repent and that he might have to love them. Heard the great speech on compassion earlier, it's that sort of thing. But improvisation frees us up to be able to take those maybe strange paths, maybe like when I started on a physics major at the beginning of my sophomore year. Don't do that, that's really not a smart move academically. When I hadn't done math in like 3 years, right? But I thought, I'm interested in this. I think I want to go for it. One of the best decisions of my entire life. So if all the world is a stage, and we're all the players, I would submit to you that we're all jazz musicians, even if all we know how to play is. So, let's trust in the process, let's trust in the Lord, and let's make some music. Thank you.